Good morning, everyone. This is Amber Hefner, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to connect with you today. I would like to start off with a big thank you to the eLuma staff for their time and effort and support in putting this all together. I've shared a few times with the staff how incredible they have been in working with us. A few weeks ago, we had an online virtual coaching hour that we offered where a special education teacher was sharing with us how she felt that there weren't a lot of resources available for her as a teacher, and what might we be able to put together. So through Kevin Rubenstein, a director of special education here in Illinois, we were connected with eLuma, and their staff quickly, in just over a week, put together the series of webinars that we are able to offer to you today. So a big thank you to them for making that happen. Today, we're starting off with online strategies for special education teachers, and I would like to introduce our presenter for this portion of our series today. Mindy Hinsey is the Vice President of Services at eLuma. She's an accomplished educator, mental health provider, and ed tech leader. She started her professional career as a classroom teacher in special education. Her passion for social emotional learning and helping students develop empathy and self-awareness inspired her to pursue a master's degree in counseling psychology so she could work in and promote mental health. Seeing opportunity to create even a greater impact, she eventually transitioned into the ed tech space, where she's worked with countless schools to improve student success and inspire change in education. As a part of this, she has helped thousands of teachers successfully develop their online teaching skills. And I can tell you from personal experience, in the last few days with Mindy, I think she's my spirit sister. So Mindy, thank you so much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amber. And by being your spirit sister, are you referring to the fact that my family used to joke about me becoming a teacher so that I could hear myself talk?
That as well, yes, certainly.
All right. Well, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. You can see my picture on the screen, but I would just like to remind all of you that selfies make your noses look about 20% bigger than they are. So picture me with a little bit smaller nose there. Well, today we're going to talk about uh, a couple of things, and I've broken this presentation down into 3 different pieces. So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about a trauma-informed approach to teaching. And our friends from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network have got some great recommendations for all of us. Then we're going to talk a little bit about moving to online teaching. If you've never taught online, I've got some suggestions to help make that easier. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with universal design for learning. And that's really a framework to make sure that teaching and learning is optimal for all people, for all learners. So before we jump into some content, I want to introduce you to a kiddo that may be like many of your students. This is Grayson. And he's 16 years old and is a sophomore at a public 5A school. So he's at a pretty big school. When he was in first grade, he was diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and processing disorders. He's the youngest of 5 kids, and just for perspective, his oldest brother is 18 years older than he is. When Grayson had just turned 12, his father passed away unexpectedly at home, and Grayson was with his mom when they found him unresponsive. He actually tried to start CPR while his mom was on the phone with 911. So just 3 weeks before his father died, Grayson's parents had pulled him out of school to homeschool him because his needs were not being met by the public school system. And after his father passed, as you can imagine, he and his mother were both diagnosed with PTSD. His mom was able to function well enough to go to work and keep the family financially stable, but she was no longer able to provide much educational support to him, and she really was not able to do homeschooling at that time. So she tried re enrolling him in school, but his PTSD was so debilitating that he missed nearly 3 years of school due to his unstable mental health. Grayson was able to attend school for a half a day each day last year, and really the success story is that he's been attending full time this year. He's currently on an IEP and he's receiving special education services for math and language arts. The schools have never addressed his dysgraphia or offered any related services to support it. Over the past 2 years, Grayson has had at least 2 concussions from snowboarding accidents. Now, I want to ask you, does Grayson sound like any of your students? Can you picture in your head a student who's experienced similar trauma, small TBIs, or maybe who has similar learning disabilities? Students like Grayson are more at risk now than ever before. He needs a trauma-informed approach to his learning. He needs scaffolding and support for online learning, and he needs his teachers to consider things like universal design for him to be successful. So now that I've given you a framework or someone to picture in your head while we're talking through these things, let's dig into some ways that we can support kids like Grayson. So Grayson experienced some pretty serious trauma at the age of 12, and the impact of that trauma um, it's had on his emotional and mental health continues today. So trauma-informed teaching is not a set of standards, strategies, or content. It's a way of viewing your students that will help you build better relationships, prevent conflict, and improve your teaching effectiveness. During COVID-19 school closures, the experts at the National Child Traumatic Stress Network recommend taking a trauma-informed approach to teaching all students, not just those who have been affected by childhood trauma like Grayson. So from a trauma standpoint, there are some things you can do to help your students during this difficult time. First, establish a routine. Kids like Grayson thrive with routine. Do you have students who do better with consistent routines? I bet if I could see all of your faces right now, you would be nodding. Predictable routines help create a sense of psychological safety. So think about things like this. If you're going to meet with your students virtually, try to keep a regular weekly schedule. So perhaps you do a Zoom or a Google Hangout check-in with all of your students on Monday morning, and then maybe you meet with them again for a half an hour in the afternoon for math instruction. Tuesdays, you may start out with reading in the morning and then social studies in the afternoon. For older students, maybe you have regularly scheduled office hours so they know when they can reach you for that just in time help. And maybe every Thursday afternoon, you do a Zoom just to see their faces. The most important thing is that you establish a routine and you do your best to stick to it no matter what. Your students and their parents will thank you. Next, build communication into your routine and make sure your communication is clear, concise, and consistent. Grayson, like many students, needs super clear and concise communication. Vague words and unclear instructions make it really hard for him to be successful. Every Monday, consider sending out a schedule for the week. Maybe Wednesday, send out a Google form to let students check in. And on Fridays, maybe you could send out a message with a preview of what you'll be working on the next week. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be using a formal learning management system like Canvas or Schoology, or there's a bunch of others, you can make announcements ahead of time and schedule them to go out at a later date to save yourself some time. When you're sending out communication, consider using video as a way to foster a sense of connectedness. And for kids like Grayson, instructions in video form are really helpful so that he and his parents can watch, pause, and rewatch the instructions as many times as needed. And that helps him so that he doesn't feel like he has to ask questions or worse, not ask and then fail. Okay, during uncertain times like today, and for kids who have experienced even deeper trauma, relationships and well-being are more important than assignment completion or perfect online behavior. Now, I'm not saying you should lower your expectations for turning in work or for peer interactions. However, it's important to remember that many students may be dealing with difficult home situations while trying to meet your educational expectations. It took Grayson nearly 3 years to recover enough from his trauma to attend school. Your students might not want to share with you that they're struggling to log in at the established times because they only have one computer and mom has a work meeting. It might be hard for them to explain to you that there's no quiet place in their apartment with their mom and 3 siblings for them to work. Kids like Grayson may not have a parent who's available during the day to help them. So it's critical to communicate with your students that regardless of their challenges, their efforts to meet the expectations are noticed and appreciated. From a psychological standpoint, a sense of safety is the belief that your needs and the needs of the people you care about will be met. As you can imagine, some of your students are experiencing or will experience significant income loss. And this crisis may also mean food insecurity or an inability to pay rent and bills, all of which can severely damage a child's sense of safety. To support your students' sense of safety, encourage them to talk to friends or family. In your lessons, include some fun, free activities that they can do at home, and encourage your parents and caregivers to try to keep their regular routines and find ways to spend unstructured fun time together. Encouraging students to self-regulate their emotions will help them develop a healthy sense of control. You can promote self-regulation by asking students to communicate their feelings. In live sessions, I like to use the fist to 5 check-in. So I'll ask, on a scale of fist to 5, fist being not at all and 5 being all the time, how often since we last checked in were you feeling lonely? And then students raise their hand with the appropriate number of fingers held up to let me know how they're doing. Part of your regular and consistent communication could also be mindfulness activities your students can try on their own. One recommendation from our expert friends is called four-corner breathing, and I absolutely love this. It's simply inhaling deeply and exhaling deeply 4 times. Students can complete the breathing exercise by standing up and taking one inhale and exhale breath while facing each of the 4 corners in a room. Now, another mindfulness activity I use with my own children is called Find Your Feet. When my kids are starting to show some signs of anxiety or frustration, I tell them to find your feet. So I want you all to play along with me right now, and we're going to do a little mindfulness activity. So I want you to find your feet. Do you feel the bottom of your feet on the floor? Press your big toes into the floor as hard as you can. Now press your heels into the floor as hard as you can. Try to make your feet as flat as possible. Spread out your toes. Now wiggle them. Now take a deep breath and let it out. Do you feel a little more calm just having done that quick activity? You can do these same types of exercises with your own students to help promote emotional self-regulation. I love, Terry, that you're saying you use Calm Classroom curriculum. That's wonderful. Okay, and finally, practice self-kindness. It's really important that you take care of yourself during this time. Create your own routines, check in with your own social supports, and do your own mindfulness activities. And if you haven't tried mindfulness, there are so many apps out there that you can try. I recommend that you try a few and find one that works for you. Now, before I move on to our next section, I want to just check in with the chat and see if there's any questions that I can answer at this time. Okay, I'm not getting any chats, so let's move on. Oh, can I recommend a couple of mindfulness apps for teens? There's one just that's called Mindful, and there's one called Breathe. So I would recommend those. But again, my own children are teenagers, and after I've taught them Find Your Feet, all I have to do is say that to them, and they go ahead and find their feet and can calm themselves. And yes, I have done some mindfulness activities with early elementary. And it works just as well. So sometimes I have to remind students that, hey, this is going to feel a little different from things that we've done before, but this is going to be really helpful for all of us to feel calm and be prepared for learning. Some people even like to call it like a centering activity before they start the teaching. So if you're doing like a virtual classroom setting where students are logging in all at the same time, you can just say, let's get centered. Everybody find your feet. Everybody stand up, sit up tall, take a deep breath. Yeah, that's great. So I know that those of you in the chat can't see the rest of the chats and the questions. So we'll try to get some resources to you to send out when we send out the recording of this. So just hold tight and we'll get some resources to you. But seriously, you can Google mindfulness curriculum or mindfulness apps and you'll find way more than you want. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So let's transition now and talk about converting to online teaching or moving to online teaching and learning. Some of you may have never done anything like this before. Some of you may have already been teaching in a hybrid situation. And some of you may have experienced teaching fully online courses. So regardless of your experience, this is not going to be mind-blowing information for you right now, but start with the learning objectives. Start with the pedagogy. What is it that is really important for you to dial in so that your students only have to focus on the most important things? Now, this just sounds like good teaching, doesn't it? So think about it. Do your students need to work on understanding key concepts and vocabulary? Do they need to apply their knowledge in a simulation? Do you want them to analyze and evaluate multiple sources of information? Start with the objectives, be clear on what those objectives are, and design learning activities that are directly linked to those objectives. And then communicate with your students how the activities connect to the objectives and to the real world. Grayson and many kids like him perform better when they understand what they need to know and how they will learn the material. I want you to think back to your own students, and maybe over the course of your teaching career, you've had a few of those students who are always asking, why do I need to know this? How does this apply to my real life? Being able to answer those questions with clear, concise, and a direct link to the learning objectives is going to be critical. Okay, next, set clear expectations for interactions and behavior. In your face-to-face classes, you've helped your students understand your processes. Where is the turn your work in basket? How do I get work back to you? You also help them understand what was acceptable behavior. Do they need to be sitting in their chair when the bell rings to be present, or if they're standing up when the bell rings, they're tardy? What is your hall pass rules for your classroom? Do you allow them to go to the bathroom as many times as they want, or do they get two passes a semester? But I think the most important thing is to remember that you can't assume that your students know how to use the technology. Many students are really app savvy more than technology savvy. They know how to use apps that do one or two things, like Snapchat, like Twitter, all of those apps that just do one thing, or they're really good at gaming. But they might not know how to navigate your online course without your help. So consider, how do you want your students to submit their work to you? Do you want it to go through the learning management system? Do you want them to email it to you? Or do you want it to be submitted to you through some other method? Now, also in the virtual group setting, how do you want your students to raise their hand to signal that they want to talk, or maybe that they do need to use the bathroom? You need to define your expectations and your new processes and clearly explain them. Then be concise and engaging. You've heard me say the word concise over and over again. So think it back to your learning outcomes, stick to the minimum things your students need to know or to do to demonstrate their learning. And now is not the time for extra information or unrelated content. Be engaging by leveraging some web-based tools and some offline activities. Quizlet, Nearpod, Padlet, Flipgrid, and Kahoot are all great examples of Web 2.0 tools you could use to share content and engage with your students and engage them in some active learning. With so many software companies and app companies like this, they're sharing their software and their apps for free during this time, and that's great. But they also need time away from screens as well, perhaps more than ever right now. And consider some of our students don't have connectivity at home. So I love using foldables and interactive notebooks with my students. And if you aren't familiar with those two concepts, again, just do a Google search, but I'm warning you, you will get lost in a rabbit hole. But foldables and interactive notebooks are a great offline activity that you could have your students do. And then finally, rethink your assessments. In an online, virtual, and remote learning, you can only control and observe limited things. You don't get to see every all-day behavior. So you might not be able to do the daily formative assessments that you're used to doing in your classroom. And now is a great time to evaluate how you assess your students. Consider alternative ways students can demonstrate their learning. Does it have to be a multiple choice test, or are there other ways they can show what they know? Now, asking a student like Grayson to handwrite 5 sentences is an absolutely overwhelming task for him. So could he record his answers on video instead? I think that the bottom line is just rethink your assessments to give all students a better experience. Now, before I move on, I'm going to check the chat again for some questions, and it looks like there's one. So the question is, being a SPED teacher and moving to online teaching is quite challenging. There are some goals in the IEP that are difficult to execute because of the limited resources at home. And parents are quite frustrated on how to deal with the student's behavior. If this is the case, should we strictly follow the IEP or give activities that can be doable at home, such as focusing more on life skills and household chores? So the answer to this question, I think, we can go back to the 4 recommendations that CASE and CEC have given. And, one is to document what you're doing, and 2, provide FAPE as much as you can, and 3, IDEA was not designed for a pandemic, so as long as you're documenting your good faith and documenting making an effort to do what's best for the student, I think you're going to be safe. So to specifically answer the question, should you be focusing more on life skills or household chores? I don't know that I can specifically answer that for your student or for your situation, but I think in a general sense, making those adjustments might be critical for a student's success right now. Okay. And yes, Amber is saying document what you're doing. Number 2, provide FAPE. Number 3, document good faith and making an effort doing. Oh, you're writing what I said. So awesome. Okay, we'll make sure that we share.
Trying to take the notes, Mindy, for you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we've done a couple of other webinars focusing on the 4 recommendations from CASE. So I'm sure that we can send those out to you as well. Okay. Are there any other questions before I move on to the next and final section? Okay, I'm moving on. Here we go. So for our last section, let's talk about universal design for learning. The Universal Design for Learning guidelines are used to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. From the UDL website, and I've got links to all of these websites in this presentation that we'll share with you. From the UDL website, we know that these guidelines offer a set of concrete suggestions that can be applied to any discipline or domain to ensure that all learners can access and participate in meaningful and challenging learning opportunities. So I think in a very oversimplified explanation, if you aren't familiar with UDL, it's about providing students with a voice and choice in their learning. So there's 3 components to Universal Design for Learning, and the first one is engagement. And this is all about how students want to interact with you, the content, and their peers. Grayson, for example, hates group work. He prefers to have time to think through things before being asked to speak in front of the class. He would much rather send a short text message or an email than have a phone conversation. So students have different preferences in the ways that they can be engaged or motivated to learn. Their unique neurology, cultures, background knowledge, and other factors play into their preferences. There's no single type of engagement that will work for all students in all settings. So we as educators need to provide students with opportunities to work alone, in groups, in pairs, and we need to remember that some students will prefer ad hoc conversations and discussions, and others will want time to think through their ideas. So if for engagement, we need to create opportunities for all types of engagements, knowing that some students will struggle more with some and thrive in others. Now, I'm not saying we only allow students to engage in their preferred methods, because I think that there's something to be said about learning to engage in other ways, but just to understand that some students aren't going to be as good at group work as other students. And some students won't be as good at working by themselves. And yes, Rebecca, I will share the URLs with everybody. So they're linked in my website, or in this presentation. Oh my gosh, words are hard. Okay, let's keep moving on. The second component of universal design for learning is representation. And representation is about the ways you present content and information. Students with sensory disabilities, learning disabilities, or language or cultural differences may need different ways to approach the content. So some students may need written text, others may need audio and visual presentations. Grayson doesn't do well when he's asked to read because of his dyslexia and his processing disorders. However, if he listens to an audiobook, or even better, if he can watch a video, his comprehension is off the charts. His friend, however, would rather read than watch a video. So just like there's no single method of engagement, there's also no single method of representation that will meet all students' needs. So we need to think, how can we present content, the same content, in a variety of ways to meet all of our students' needs? Okay, and finally, the third section in Universal Design for Learning is about action and expression. And this is about the different ways students are able to show what they know. In our last section, I encouraged you to examine how to assess students. And it's even more important for our students with learning differences. So some of your students may be able to express themselves really well in written text, but not in speech, and vice versa. So keep in mind that action and expression require, on the learner's part, strategy, practice, and organization. And this also is another area in which your students are not the same. So in reality, there's no one means of action and expression that will be optimal for all students. And universal design is all about providing options and exploring different ways to access the content, to engage in the content, and then to demonstrate what they know. So I'm going to take time to look at the chat now. And do I have so let me go back up. So Candy asks, how can paraprofessionals help? You know, Candy, this is a tough question, and I've been asked this a couple of times, and I think that the reason I'm having a hard time answering this is because paraprofessionals do different jobs in different school settings. So I'm not sure what your role is or how you support students right now. But I would say reach out to the teachers that you've been working with and see how you can support them. And then my next question from Terry is, do I have recommendations for those with significant and profound disabilities or individuals with severe autism? Terry, that's a tough question. Those are tough questions too, because if you're used to working with, that's your entire classroom. Okay, so you're used to working with these students in a face-to-face setting, and sometimes online doesn't translate well. And so I'm going to have to do some digging on you for specific recommendations. I have a feeling that somebody much smarter than myself has already figured some things out. And so maybe with some digging, we can come up with some suggestions. Amber is saying that one suggestion someone gave yesterday was to have the paras join the online session just to watch the students and look for body language check-ins, etc. Amber, I love that. I love that idea for paraprofessionals. Join the sessions, be a second set of eyes on your students, and maybe monitoring the chat. And depending on which video conferencing tool you're using, you can even do breakout sessions. So you could put the paraprofessional and a student in a breakout session for some one-on-one support. That's a great idea. Okay, so on assessments, is it advisable to give parents a checklist or rubrics to get feedback of how our students are performing while doing offline activities? What if the parent cannot fully commit on doing these assessments? What are your suggestions to have reliable and authentic assessment on student performance? Oh gosh, again, tough questions. So I think that yes, it is advisable to give parents a checklist or a rubric so that they know what to look for in behavior. And I think that we need to just acknowledge that parents often won't be able to fully commit on doing the assessments, and it might not be as reliable as we've had in the past. I think maybe asking parents to record a student doing some type of a task could be a beneficial way for you to then reassess it yourself. But this is just going to be one of those situations where nobody's done this before. We're not really sure how to move forward with it. So do your best and document. That's what I would say. Some other suggestions we've got for paras: reach out to students, keep encouraging them for any progress they make. The contact is important. I absolutely agree, Kim. And then Candy's saying that she's in on the sessions when they do hangout. And Jeanette is asking, how do I support parents in understanding what I am doing? My recommendation, and this is just, life according to Mindy Hinsey, I would say video. Send video. Show them what you're doing. I know that if any of you have children of your own and you are doing at-home education with your own children, you've probably heard once or twice, that is not how my teacher does it. And that causes a lot of frustration and tears. So simply sending home a video or doing a walkthrough of the assignment. When I taught online, I often simply held the worksheet up in front of the camera and pointed to the different sections and said, in this section, this is what you're supposed to do. In this section, this is what I'm looking for. And in this section, this, and don't forget to put your name on your paper. Please put your name on your paper. Don't forget to put your name on your paper. So, think about simple task helps like that. Okay, we're getting lots of questions coming in. Do you have recommendations for elementary students with emotional and behavioral disabilities? Rebecca, I would highly recommend reaching out to your district or school psychologist to get some help with them, depending on what the cause of the emotional or behavioral disability is. I don't think there's one good recommendation for that because that's all so unique. So I love these recommendations that are coming in. So Devante is also saying, I would suggest to that person, if there is phrasing, posters, anchor charts, or anything of that sort, send it home electronically to the family as well. That's a great recommendation. Okay, so we're done with this third section, and I'm just going to wrap things up here pretty quickly. Now, some of you may have figured this out, but Grayson is my son. And on behalf of all of the parents who have kiddos just like mine, learning disabilities, childhood trauma, and huge gaps in their educational experiences, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for all of the work you do to support kids like Grayson. Now, I hope you found these strategies and ideas useful, and I challenge you to try one or two things that I shared with you with your students next week. Think about what can you do to continue your support for your students like Grayson. And keep being amazing and doing good things for your students. And thank you for joining me today. So we've got just a few more minutes if there's any other questions. Somebody is asking, when are the other webinars? They are going to start at the top of every hour for the next 3 hours. Katie, yes, we will be sharing the presentation. And Jeanette, I'm good that this has helped you feel less like an appendage. That's great. And Kim, can you contact me directly? Sure. My email is mhinsey@eluma.com. I will type, oh, you can't see it in the chat. So, and Catherine will be sending it out to everyone who registered for the presentation. So Kim, I'll make sure that my contact information is on the deck as well, so you can see it there. And if there's not any other questions, I guess we can kind of wrap this up. But
Mindy, thank you so much. What an incredible and fulfilling 35 minutes you just provided us with. I was furiously taking notes the entire time. So when the recording does come out, I know I will be rewatching it as well. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I did put the link, if anybody's interested, I did put the link to our website, the ideaillinois.org website, with the event listing. That does contain the remaining sessions as well. So feel free to go there and register for the remaining sessions. You can still, there's no closing on registration. And as Mindy mentioned, the recording and the chat and resources provided here and Mindy's email address will be included. So Mindy, thank you again so much. We really appreciate this. Your expertise and passion is just inspiring. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute delight for me to present. I love sharing stuff like this. So please invite me back to talk some more.
All right, we will be doing that for sure.
Okay. Oh, Pamela, and yes, I love talking about my son Grayson. Let me just tell you, he is the baby of 5, like I mentioned earlier, and he's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about special education services for students. It's sad to say that his experience in public education has not been the best. So if I can make an impact and help other educators do better for their students, then I'm delighted to be a part of it.
Thank you, Mindy. And we did have a question, and I'm glad that Susan or Sherry asked about credit for being a part of the webinar. And I did put the link into the chat. So Illinois educators can fill that link out and receive professional development hours, as we are an approved provider from our State Board of Education. If you are outside of Illinois, feel free to go ahead and fill that information out as well. It will auto send you a PDF that shares the session that you were in. We give an hour for this type of webinar. And hopefully if you're outside of Illinois, your state will take that credit as well.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.